Thank you for your question. In my view, it is not a coincidence that the Obama administration has used foreign aid as a tool to advance an ideological agenda. Their entire foreign policy thrust is dominated by ideology. So the allocation of funds for foreign democracy, development, public diplomacy, various civil society organizations, all of that is pretty typical of the Obama administration. I think more so probably than any that has come before. And it is noteworthy if you go through USAID grants given by the government, also some within the State Department itself, that subcontracting to organizations such as George Soros is very, very common. It involves millions of dollars, all in this case, throughout Central and Eastern Europe. To me, it looks very much like there is a political agenda at work which aims at breaking down national barriers, which aims at going counter to conservative, to right-wing governments, and which promotes the intake of refugees from the Middle East. They are, in fact, through this intake of refugees, it seems to me, helping to advance a political agenda which was already there to begin with. It is clearly something that would present a problem with the backing of the U.S. government. This is not just the view of one billionaire, well-heeled funder of many organizations, but now it also has the imprint of the U.S. government. And as we have seen here in Washington, it does reflect the views of the Obama administration. This is not a coincidence that these things are, in fact, synchronized. So, I mean, I would consider it a significant problem for a U.S. foreign policy problem, as well as a problem of the misuse, in some ways, of U.S. government funds. Yes, I do. I definitely see it as eroding U.S. national interests. For one thing, U.S. relations with Middle Eastern countries, the whole issue of the war in Syria and Iraq, which we have from the U.S. side mishandled dreadfully to the point where we have helped create the refugee situation that now exists in Europe, and which at some point may affect the United States as well. And I also see it as a deep problem in the relations between the United States and some of the best allies it had in Europe. Throughout the Bush administration and even the Clinton administration as well, the United States was working very hard to create a Europe that was whole and free. That was the phrase. And bringing in the countries of Eastern and Central Europe closer to the rest of Europe, to the European Union to some degree, and especially into NATO. There was great loyalty, great warmth, and great support from these countries for the United States, and vice versa. Now what we're seeing is that we're basically seeing the European Union split apart over the refugee crisis, over reactions in Central and Eastern Europe. And we're seeing the United States having problems establishing and keeping the same kind of relations with its European allies that we have been used to in the past and that we have benefited greatly from. The Obama administration here has been known, in a sense, to be supporting our enemies and punishing our allies, and I think that is what has happened in this case as well. You asked a question about the various political protests that have taken place, apparently with U.S. support in countries like Hungary and Macedonia, with apparently elements supported by the United States. To some degree, I would say that the Occupy Wall Street movement does show similar elements to what you are here referring to. And that clearly had the sympathy of the Obama administration on its side. In some way, Wall Street a couple of years ago emerged, as it often does with the left wing, as the great scary monster whom we always have to attack because it's the vested interests, the establishment, the moneyed interests, all that. So the government, the Obama administration, did show a lot of sympathy for the Occupy Wall Street movement. Now, it did fizzle because it ended up being so enormously counterproductive and useless, and often it caused enormous inconvenience to the citizens of Washington and New York that in the end it could not be justified. But there is the same political point of view is on display, and it is a disturbing one. Now, the Obama administration, in terms of if we're looking at migrant crises, it still persists in insisting that it will be bringing at least 10,000, and if Hillary Clinton is elected, possibly 50,000 Middle Eastern Syrian refugees to the United States, which will also cause a lot of, and is dominating the political debate here during the presidential election season. So, the same points of view are on display here. The problem, though, is, there is a distinction because we are in a presidential election year. So the focus is really off the Obama administration itself, and much more so on the political presidential campaign. And we have not seen quite the same attention paid to social movements that you do see in Europe at this time. Our focus is very political and very narrow at the moment, which is probably unfortunate, but that is the case. I would absolutely agree that the Congress should look into the allocation of USAID funding. USAID funding should not be used for political purposes. That has never been the purpose of this government agency. It is supposed to be about something that has bipartisan support, and it often has had that in the past. Congress does have a role to play here, and there are very good people. Congress is in Republican hands, as you know. There are members of the Foreign Relations Committees, both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, who would be very interested to know, I think, in the extent to which U.S. government funding is being used to promote certain political causes in other countries. And in fact, since you have raised my awareness to this subject, I think maybe the Heritage Foundation will be advocating that members of Congress do look into how political this funding has become. It was never the intention that one organization, in this case the Soros groups, should be able to undertake as many contracts as they do from the U.S. government, often with a very limited bidding process, I might add. I looked into it since you contacted me, and I have found that this is something that definitely is not the way the law was intended. Yes, privatizing contracts is a good thing. Subcontracting U.S. foreign policy to one group is definitely not a good thing. I don't know if you can say that there is specifically a law against it. There would definitely be a law against its use within the United States. Not so, I think, in relation to other countries, but there is obviously what is right and what's wrong and what's ethical. And Congress has a supervisory role, which it can exercise at any time, and which I do think it should. Much more light should be shone on this issue here in Washington. And in fact, I thank you for calling my attention to it. Hey, you have a good day. Good luck with your program. I'd love to see it. Send me a link when it's done.